Continuing on the subject of ridge testing, I wanted to show what it's like to test a ridge that is not working. Now, in this particular case, we're at 2,400 feet, just below it, and we're going to go and choose to stay with the ridge and keep settling down, despite the fact that in this scenario, I set up zero wind. There's absolutely no wind today. And it's pretty easy to surmise that, well, in short order, you will settle right down to the ridge, and then the ridge will not work, and then will require a land out. Now, this doesn't happen very often in this kind of situation because we tend to pay a lot of attention to the reservoir, we tend to pay a lot of attention to the weather forecasts, and so we generally don't put ourselves, we generally don't choose to go out here unless we have a pretty good idea that it ought to work. However, at some point in your ridge flying career, you will settle down onto a ridge that's not working sufficiently, either locally, maybe not, but certainly cross country. So what ends up happening is if you're gonna say be thermaling along on a day with some wind, and you might be settling down onto a ridge and think maybe you can pick up a thermal, maybe you can sustain on it for a little while. There's a good chance you'll try it and then you will fall off. And it's very important to see how this works. Now, the critical thing to realize is that as you settle down, that there will not be an equilibrium point today. What that means is there's no altitude or airspeed that's going to sustain you. Now, this sounds kind of obvious, and in a sense it is. There is not enough lift to sustain the glider. But the thing is if you go out there and you fly many ridge days that work, you will get the impression, albeit, kind of ridiculously, that if you settle down, there will be an equilibrium point at some point. And if you're not thinking, it's very easy to kind of fall into that trap. So in the first demonstration, we're going to just settle down onto the ridge and show what this looks like. Now in this case, we just found a little bit of a thermal, and the thermals will let you go and it actually will sustain you quite a bit, just, if there's a decent bit of thermal activity in the area. But, and also along those lines, speaking of the thermals, it takes very little wind and very little action. Like it could, even 2 or 3 knots of wind at the right part of the day will line up quite a number of thermals along the ridge. And even if the wind is pretty weak, you can then sort of bounce along in these thermals. That's actually another interesting discussion for another time in terms of how to deal with weak ridges and things like that. But the thing that happens is you can get fooled that when you are up at, say, 2,400 feet, 2,000 feet, that you go and you find a couple like little thermals along the way, and you sort of bounce along, and then you think, oh man, that high band is working today. And then you start settling down, and, well, it really isn't. And so, we're kind of flying along, and now we're going to go and do a lap back, thinking, hey, we're going to be, we're going to be finding that, we're going to be looking for that ridge band, And we're seeing a glide of the field at the base of the ridge, of course, because that's our option at this point. Notice how quickly we are settling down. See, our sink rate is about 3 knots down, and we'll slow down a little bit. We're going to go about best glide speed. But and here's another kind of worthwhile point. Pay a lot of attention to the sink rate, and pay a lot of attention to how quickly those trees are going to come up at us. So when the ridge is working even a tiny bit, you will get good air, well above ridgetop. So you might be, you might not, that equilibrium point at 2,400 feet, it might not be there. So you might be going along at 50, 45 miles an hour, and you might be sinking at 1 knot. But if the ridge is not working at all, then you're going to be sinking 2 or 3 knots. And then from this point on, we're going to be down on the crest in 2 minutes. And in fact, in the beginning, when you have doubt as to whether the ridge is working or not, a lot of times it's easier to say, well, you know, I have been sustaining more or less for the past 4 or 5 minutes, therefore the ridge ought to be working. Because if it isn't working, I'd be down in the treetops really quickly. And here we are, and notice how fast that altimeter is unwinding, and notice how fast that, notice how strong that sink rate is, and notice the fact that it's not abating. Now, right about now, if this was a real-life situation, I would be very concerned. And the fact that, supposing that maybe I got circuited in at 2,400 feet and thought that, that little bit of a thermal was good ridge lift or something like that, if I saw my altimeter unwind that fast, and I didn't feel any action coming in underneath the glider by this point, I would be very much looking at trying to climb off the ridge and get away, and do it earlier and while there's still time to spare. But we're very, 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 very close to the point where things are not working out at all. So if you find yourself in this situation where you're settling down, settling down, settling down, you really, then there's a certain point where, and this we're pretty much there, where you have to start accepting that this is a bad place, you're in trouble, and that you are going to try to put yourself at 150 feet at 50 miles an hour, and that, or preferably higher, but if you get down to 150 feet at 50 miles an hour, then at that point you should be seriously thinking about bailing off and going for a field or your best alternative. But in this case, the ridge is about 1,500 feet high, so we're kind of sitting and the 1,600 feet behind us, and so we're getting very close to the point where we're not going to be able to recover from the situation. Still settling down at 2 knots. Suppose we go and we try to make another lap back. Now, notice how we're keeping that airspeed up. Notice how quickly these trees are coming up at us. We're getting down lower and lower. That variometer is not doing anything. We're still in trouble, and right about now we're at 150 feet at 50, and we're going to leave the ridge. Right about now, your heart rate will probably be up quite a bit. You're going to realize that this is a really bad, that you're in trouble here. One thing to think about is you have that option at the base of the ridge. Take a deep breath. Relax, get into a landing mindset. You're no longer flying the ridge. You have some time, think through it, make sure you have your airspeed, and then put yourself in the mindset that you're landing out in short order. There is a remote possibility that you might encounter a thermal along this way, but it's highly, highly, highly unlikely. Now, as we head along into this field, it's worth noting that, you can land it really in either direction. With no wind, it doesn't really matter if you decide to go northeast or southwest. Now, for today, I figure I'd play it to the southwest. I'm going to be making a full pattern into this field, and it's going to be a normal. You land it just in the same manner as you would normally. So you would do the checklist, you would do everything as you would normally. And so at this point, we're going to do undercarriages down locked, speed, we'll do 50 knots, about 55 miles an hour. Trim is all the way forward, air brake is working. look. Looks pretty open to me. No crops. The slope is flat. The wind is non-existent. We will land in the middle. We're going to clear those little discontinuities, and then now we're going to focus on landing. My pattern nice and tight, nice and high with nice airspeed. Turn final with plenty of altitude to spare. If there is any wind, don't forget to put in that crosswind correction. We had a pilot that failed to do that, and then he ended up ground looping once he landed here. Now, once we get into ground effect, we're going to kind of follow out the slope a little bit here, and just sort of find a flatter spot, and then we're going to do a full stall landing. Stick all the way back. And then once you land, stick is all the way back, spoilers are all the way back. There you have it. So the things to note here were how when there's no wind, when the ridge is not working, when there's no lift, you will settle down onto the mountain very, 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 very quickly. And you should be prepared to exercise your alternative option, in this case the field at the base of the ridge, and be willing to leave pretty promptly. And then once that happens, things happen very quickly. You might be down on the ground in as little as 2 minutes in some cases. And so you have to very quickly be able to kind of transition, you have to, your mindset into, I am now landing. And beyond that, the landing could be difficult. It could be in a pretty tricky field. This is a very nice field. But you have to go, into this mindset that I'm landing now, and, set yourself up for success there, and kind of calm yourself down after have been under a lot of stress trying to make the ridge work, and then make a safe landing at the base of the ridge.